Good evening, everyone. I hope you're doing well. A few years ago, many of us have forgotten that we're in lockdown. At the time, I was pounding the table that the lockdowns were a terrible idea, that slashing interest rates to zero, printing trillions of dollars, governments running up massive debts, that there would be consequences for decades to come. And many of you probably think that's behind us. We're only just getting started on that. The state of Victoria, one of the most locked down places on the planet, from 1990 to 2020, a 30-year period, net debt in the state of Victoria, so the government debt was about 20 billion. It was 20 billion in 1990, 20 billion in late 2018. And of course, we all know what happened in 2020. You can see the debt has now exploded tenfold on its way to 200 billion. I think counting the net debt is a little disingenuous, but the gross debt is forecast to go to 236 billion. So total debt. They have some accounting tricks that they use, like, for example, state owned commercial entities like water authorities that borrow money from the state government. The government counts that as money owed back to them, so they don't count that as part of their debt. That's a deeper dive topic, but I think that's a bit disingenuous. The unfunded superannuation time bomb, the Victoria's public sector superannuation liability, unfunded liability sits between 16 and 18 billion dollars. So all the government workers are owed lots of superannuation, and then they've deferred $3 billion of payments between 2023 and 2027. The state deferred that. They were running short on cash, too much debt, and the federal government has warned them that this will add to their debt, that it's a terrible thing to do in the long term. The state of Victoria has the worst credit rating in the country, double A, and warnings of further downgrades. Interest rates are going up. They have massive debt, lots of interest to pay on those huge debts. They've been running deficits for nearly 10 years now. They can't balance a budget. The public sector is expanding far beyond what the population is, both in terms of cost and size. That's all across Australia, but Victoria especially. Infrastructure cost blowouts, not limited to Victoria, and the state has been they've imposed 33 separate taxes and duties. They've got this COVID debt repayment plan. They're hitting people with lots of new taxes, like all those land taxes, and people are leaving. While the population is slightly growing due to migration, people are leaving Melbourne to move to regional areas, or they're moving to Queensland and Western Australia due to housing costs, taxes, etc. And then Melbourne has the worst performing property market in the country relative to other places. Like, we've seen massive booms in Perth. People are leaving. Landlords are having to sell. There's a record number of well, not a record number, sorry, but an increased amount of landlords selling their property. And then the final warning was from the International Monetary Fund. They warned Australia that the federal government in Australia may need to bail out state governments, because state governments, they specifically mentioned Victoria, state governments have far too much debt, and it's a massive problem.